Recognition, power, and influence is your birthright, and this podcast shows you how to get there. Welcome to episode number 279. Today's episode, I'm giving you a different type of strategy. I am showing you how you can begin to get yourself set up for a higher level leadership role, get a promotion, or maybe you're already in a higher level leadership role and you want to create a consulting business on the side or in parallel, or maybe to replace your corporate income. It's not something I talk a ton about here on this podcast, but it is definitely something that my clients are doing. And I wanted to share with you some of the things that are working for them and what you can begin to start to implement for yourself. All right, let's get started. Welcome to Women Changing Leadership. I am your host, Stacy Mayer, and I teach you how to get promoted, get paid, and bring your whole self to the leadership table. I am on a mission to change organizations from the C-suite out because women are the new face of leadership, and we are doing it on our terms. Hello, corporate badasses. Welcome to another episode of Women Changing Leadership. I am your host, Stacy Mayer, and super excited, as always, to be here with you again this week. This past week, I was having a Sunday session inside of my Women's Leadership Accelerator. This is my group mentorship program where we are all collectively working together to get the recognition, power, and influence that we deserve. And if you are not already in that program, I invite you to come join us to check that out at authenticallypowerfulwomen.com. We will link to that in the show notes as well. But in this last week's conversation, we were talking about impossible goals and how to use that as a strategy to actually reach our possible goals. So each one of you has a goal that you're setting for, like, let's say the next 6 weeks, where you'd like to see yourself by midsummer or next quarter or by the end of the year or whatever that might be. And I taught them my strategy of using an impossible goal to get there faster. And one of the women shared with the group that her impossible goal was to get a job offer or get a consulting gig. And this is because she has been looking for a job opportunity for the past few months. And she says, hey, you know what? I just want to get back to work. So even if I'm working as a consultant, that's fine by me. The advice that I offered her in terms of an actual impossible goal. So first of all, a possible goal would be to just get a job or a consulting gig in the next 6 weeks. So that's pretty practical. I hope that she's able to do that. I think that with my support inside of the accelerator, she will definitely be able to make that happen. But I was telling her and pointing out that what if her impossible goal, I am possible goal would be to get both a consulting gig and a job offer. And her eyes just like popped out of her head. She was like, oh my gosh, that's totally it. So you might already be listening to this and thinking about why that strategy of setting an impossible goal makes your possible goals even faster. But I've already recorded a podcast episode on that, which I'll link to inside the show notes. Instead, for this episode, I want to talk about that impossible idea of creating a job opportunities as well as consulting gigs at the same time. And it was really fun when I mentioned this to her as a possibility, because I don't think she had ever really thought of it that way, but I think of it that way all the time. Why? Because I'm working with clients to do exactly that. And I realized that I've never recorded a podcast episode on the how-to behind getting high-level job offers as well as working as a consultant on the side. Now, the first thing I want you to know is that a lot of people do this a lot of the time. And I know this because I have a client base that is doing just that. But I have also worked very specifically to help clients to do just that. So the episode is really geared towards both the possibility that that's even an option for you, but also how to do that and how that works practically speaking. So let me go back in time when I first started my coaching business, which now we're going on almost 8 years. And I was working with a client who worked in the dental profession. And she was, I don't think this is exactly correct, but I think she was something like a dental hygienist at the time. And essentially, what I would equate that to is basically an individual contributor, but she hired me because she was knew that she was meant for something more. And she also worked in a very toxic work environment at the time where she had a boss that was very demanding. She had a lot of demands on her hours. She didn't feel incredibly fulfilled in her work, although she went to school for this for many, many years. She gets paid very, very well, but she didn't feel like she was able to have that recognition and power and influence that she deserved. So she met with me essentially to build out her dental career and to figure out what was going to be next for her in that industry. And what we ended up spending a great deal of time on is figuring out her plan to be a consultant, her entrepreneurial gig on the side that she was going to work on while she continued to work on her challenges at work. And fast forward to today, where she has a full on 501c3 consulting business where she is able to offer dental advice, give talks. She shows up at conferences, and she is doing quite well in her business that she has created for herself. Now, I sort of saw this as the time as a one-off thing that, most of the women that I was going to be working with were looking to navigate the corporate world and to figure out how to get into higher level leadership positions. But that wasn't at all the case. Let me tell you another story of a woman who was a pretty high level consultant for a consultant agency. So she worked as a managing director for a huge, and you probably know of them if you know about these big consultant firms. And she worked as a consultant at this firm, and she was pretty high up. And she also felt like she wasn't getting the recognition, power, and influence that she deserved. And she was going to switch jobs. So she wanted to learn how to interview and to build up her reputation outside of her particular firm and how that would translate into other organizations. So that's the work that we worked on. And while we were doing that, I really empowered her to find her voice, to begin networking, to tap into her audience that she already had, to begin posting on LinkedIn again, to share about her experiences, to essentially create her own thought leadership. And one of her coaching calls, she actually emailed me ahead of time and she said, okay, I decided to leave that job. I'm actually not going to look for another role, and I'm going to go into business with my husband instead. And this is something that she had been working on for a long time. And she decided that she was going to put all of her eggs in that basket. And then she was going to use the work and the rest of our coaching contract to continue to build her voice, to advocate for herself, and to get other people financially invested in her business. So fast forward to today, she's having a great deal of success. She's like, I can't believe I didn't do this all along. And I'm incredibly happy. So this is a natural byproduct of showing up in your own power, staying in your lane, is that you're going to go out on your own. And some people are going to do that in terms of free thought leadership, meaning you will start a podcast, you maybe write a book, maybe post on LinkedIn, something like that. And a lot of you are going to start your own consulting business. So whether that's in your subject matter expertise, or perhaps you might become an executive coach, a mentor, a formal mentor for other women to have success in their careers. And this also happens for my clients, which is why, drum roll please, I am actually starting my first ever coaching certification inside of the leadership table. So I am working with women proactively at this moment to begin to create their own coaching businesses on the side. So I've given you a couple of examples of this as a possibility. And now I want to show you how to do both. Okay? Because a lot of you aren't ready to quit that job. You don't necessarily even want to work as a consultant full time, but you like the idea of making a little bit of money on the side. And so once you know that this is a possibility, then what I want you to do is to start showing up in that thought leadership way online. And I think it's really an interesting perspective. So, depending on where you're at in your job opportunities, typically speaking, this works best at that VP level or above because it means that you have a certain amount of clout at your organization. Perhaps they do already see you as an industry leader, a professional who has a voice in the community. Maybe you're even representing your organization externally through your voice. And you have a lot of leg room when you're at those higher levels of leadership. One of the challenges that I'll go ahead and put out there, like let's say you want to just start by sharing your thought leadership on LinkedIn immediately. Depending on how much trust you've built at your organization and how much they see you as a thought leader already, you're going to run into some real roadblocks very quickly. Like I always say, the fastest way to get sent to the human resources office is to start posting on LinkedIn all of a sudden, especially if you're a senior manager or a lower level director, especially if you don't have a ton of autonomy at your organization. They're going to see it as a red flag. They're going to start to wonder, who is she to be posting? Is she looking for a job? Like, what's her deal? Maybe they don't want you to have a consulting gig on the side. So I'm saying all of this with a caveat to remind you that this isn't a one size fits all method. But if you use my strategies to get a new role in a different organization, or maybe even internally a higher level role at your organization, then what you're doing is you're really building trust that you have a voice in the community while you're creating that role for yourself. So typically, this works best for my clients who have used their thought leadership to create the role that they currently have. So, if that's you, if you're at this place where you feel like you can openly share your opinions in public, you feel like you can talk about your subject matter expertise, maybe you even want to start some consulting on the side, then usually what that means is that you just have to get permission. So again, you're already in some sort of a position of authority and they respect you at your organization for being that thought leader. And if you want to have consulting gigs, then you just have to get conflict of interest buy-in from human resources. So you're going to be very proactive about it. You're not going to do it under the table, but typically it's something that can be married into your job as long as it's not a conflict of interest. You could totally make money as a consultant and not even have to talk about it publicly. So it could be something that you keep to yourself, that you just get consulting gig after consulting gig. Your organization doesn't really care about it, and everybody lives happily ever after. You're building both at the exact same time in a very above the table, honest way. Now, there's this other thing that happens where you want to market your consulting business. So again, you've built trust at your organization. You're in a position of influence. Nobody cares if you post on LinkedIn or don't. I want to remind you that posting on LinkedIn is only one teeny tiny part of the equation of becoming a consultant. There's a couple of different things that come to mind when I think about how you're actually going to have success in your consulting business. And the first thing that comes to mind is networking. So if you like my 15-minute ally meeting strategy, if you've had success using my 15-minute ally meeting strategy, you can absolutely do this to get external buy-in on your consulting business. Start to tell people about the work that you're doing, some of the ideas that you have. Another thing that is really, really impactful is if you start showing up on bigger platforms. So suggest like podcast interviews. If you give a talk or you sit on a panel about a subject matter that you actually care about, this all falls under the category of sharing your thought leadership. Now, the really cool thing about this is typically for my clients, if they are on a panel or they talked at a workshop or something like that, and then they share that they were on that panel on LinkedIn, even if you're in those senior manager or director level roles, you're not going to get any flack from human resources. So there's a difference in posting about your appearance on a panel versus sharing your thought leadership on LinkedIn. So when you just start sharing a bunch of posts and it looks like you're basically selling a business or selling yourself, then that's when it raises the red flags. Again, depending on how much trust you've built in your organization. I don't mean to scare you. If you're somebody who knows that you can do whatever the heck you want, I welcome it, welcome it, welcome it. Another stealthy way that you can begin to share your thought leadership is, so the first thing is sharing about some of the presentations, about maybe perhaps some of the videos that you've done. You can put them in your featured section of, any sort of appearances that you've had in public. That is an excellent way to share about your thought leadership. Another thing is to comment on other people's posts. So if you're commenting, if you're engaging in conversation in small groups, these are ways that you can begin to plant the seeds about your consulting business, but you don't have to be quite so obvious about the fact that you're doing both. I want to be a vice president at an organization and also build my consulting business and start getting clients. Now, at some point, you're going to want to quit your day job, and that's amazing. But hopefully at this point, you've built up those skills of sharing about the information that you're doing, creating a body of work, sharing about your ideas. And then somebody says, hey, they have an opportunity, and you're like, well, I could come work for you as a consultant. If you're proactively on the job search, then all of this becomes very easy, because if you're actively posting online about your thought leadership, about your ideas, on your subject matter expertise, you have real value to give the community. You're appearing on panels, you're appearing on podcasts, you're sharing about your ideas, and you don't have a job. That's amazing, because it makes you look like an expert. And actually, even internally, I'll often suggest as a promotion strategy to look like an expert in your field. I have a great story about a woman who I coached who was a vice president of human resources, who reported directly to her CEO. This is a story inside my book. That's why I was like, I've been sharing this story for a while. And she came to me because she wanted to be promoted. And not only that, she wanted to be included. So she's the highest in human resources in her chain. Like I said, reporting directly to the CEO. And really what she should have been is a CHRO. That was basically her role, but she didn't have that title. And she definitely didn't have that influence. So in the management team meetings, her voice would always get pushed to the bottom. Her agenda items would always be dismissed. And I asked her how she knew what she knows about human resources. And she said, I belong to multiple CHRO groups. I'm constantly learning about best practices. I have a lot of information about what's happening. I really stay up to date. I read a lot. I'm always thinking about best practices and asking people what's working and what's not working at their organizations. And I asked her if she had ever shared any of this information with her boss, the CEO, that she belonged to all these organizations and this is how she gathered information. And the answer was no. It never occurred to her to share that type of information with her boss. And this is what I mean about creating your own thought leadership, because when you can start to share that information, like I think bigger than just my job. I think about the industry. I think about other organizations and the work that they're doing. I have a vast network of people that I'm bringing to the table. When you can start to expand your scope in that way and really be seen as that thought leader, you become more valuable for your internal organization. They realize this isn't just your ideas that you're coming up with. This is part of a bigger landscape. And then they promote you. So this is something to really consider, is that you become more valuable the more thought leadership that you share. And if you're doing it with the idea in mind that I could maybe become a consultant someday, then yes, more power to you. Start doing that. Start showing up in that way. And then, for a lot of clients, they'll actually create that LLC. They'll put it on their LinkedIn profile as a job, and you can have parallel jobs. You can have a job and an LLC at the same exact time, perfectly allowed. Now, at some organizations, it might not be allowed. So look into that, like I said. But if you know that it's allowed at your organization or certainly your job searching, why not? Because what you're doing is you're really setting yourself up as this well-rounded person who has something to say in the industry. And typically speaking, for people who want recognition, power, and influence, this is creating recognition, power, and influence even before you get the job. So I used to have a group program called Executive Ahead of Time. So this is like basically being that executive leader ahead of time and really showing up as somebody who brings a lot of value. So I hope that today's episode gave you some ideas, some things to think about. If you are at that place where you're like, I can't really start talking about my own thought leadership in the particular situation that I'm at work, I want to keep things on the DL, then I recommend just building networking on the side, having conversations on the side, because it's going to help your self-esteem. It's going to help craft what it is that matters to you. It is going to make you a better leader in the long run. And best case scenario, you'll reach your impossible goal of creating a new job for yourself, a higher level leadership position, and a consulting business at the exact same time. This is possible for you, and it's a super heck of a lot of fun. If you're somebody who has created this, shoot me a direct message on LinkedIn. I would absolutely love to hear from you. And if you're somebody who's wanting to start dabbling in this, tag me in some of your posts on LinkedIn and I will help you get more reach. I'll help spread the word. I will comment on them. I absolutely love giving back to women who are ready to show up as a thought leader in the world, in the space. And we need more of your leadership right now, today, exactly as it is. Thank you all so much for listening, and I'll see you next week. Bye. Before you go, I have a question for you. Do you know how close you are to your next promotion? Really? Not what your boss has told you, not what you even believe to be true, but have you actually taken the time to sit down, take an assessment, review the 5 categories that it takes to get promoted into senior executive leadership positions and decided where you fall in each category and given yourself a ranking on a scale of 1 to 10 of how close you are to getting your next promotion? Have you done this? Well, now's your chance. If that feels interesting to you and you're like, hey, I want to know exactly how close I might actually be or how far away you might be and what it's going to take to get you even closer, then I invite you to take my promotability quiz. This is a quiz that I put together with practical tips that actually tell you where you're lacking and where you're winning. What are the areas that you actually need to improve and not necessarily what your boss is telling you all the time so that you can take concrete steps towards landing that next promotion and changing the face of the leadership table. Go to yourpromotabilityscore.com to take your free assessment today.